So thanks to everybody joining in. We are really glad that you can be with us today. Let's give a couple of seconds for more people to join in, and we're going to start the conversation. As you might already have noticed, our guest is already live with us, Erica, and we are going to have as open as possible a conversation regarding an issue that we've been talking about for the past, this is the third week, and hopefully at the end, and by next week, we are going to be finishing these all mathematics reporting series. And it's really been amazing. And I hope at the end of this series of webinars, every question that you have regarding mathematics reporting will be answered. And that said, I think this is a convenient time for us to go live. So many thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Paul Adipoju, and I'm the community manager for the International Center for Journalists Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting. And we are really, really glad that you can be here with us, and everything that we've been doing since the past couple of weeks has really been in bringing attention to the untapped opportunities, untapped stories that journalists in different parts of the world can actually write from in taking insights from mathematics reporting. And I think people are already used to what I will be asking them to do, which is impressive, which is do not be shy to interact with us, to actively engage with us. Use this chat box, which some people are already doing, to tell us your name and where you are joining us from. And it's really insightful to be able to reach you in different parts of the world, different time zones. In some parts of the world, they are in the morning. Some parts of the world is late in the evening, while some are actually staying up late at night or very early in the morning to be part of this conversation. So we appreciate you. We don't take your time for granted. And we know that as we are serious about ensuring that you get the best out of this experience, you are also committed to bringing the best, getting the best from the panelists that we've been bringing to you week in, week out. So when we had the first session, we kicked off this mathematics reporting series with Jordana from Quanta magazine, who really went extensively in telling us everything that we need to know about mathematics reporting, different aspects of it, getting our sample stories, model stories, ideas that you can take direction from. Then we went last week. We had Dr. Africa, who has a PhD in mathematics and is also a mathematics entrepreneur. She also spoke extensively on how mathematics is being used to solve problems across different sectors. And it became really obvious that it's not really just about covering mathematics alone, but you seeing how you can apply mathematics in your story. And so some lines of thought that became quite obvious as we continue in this conversation has always been the fact that some people, some journalists think there is a thin line between data journalism and of course mathematics reporting. And we hope we have been able to make this much clearer, that you can see elements of either in both of them. You can see elements of data journalism in mathematics reporting, and you can also see elements of mathematics reporting in data journalism. It's all about telling stories. And today we are actually taking this conversation forward. And before I introduce the guests that we have today, I would like to give you a background of how we got to having this conversation. So for long, we've been thinking about how do we put this together. And so during their preparative stage, I came across a really, really good story that I believe speaks to the essence of what we are trying to achieve here. And it was published in the Open Notebook. I read it extensively, and we are going to be having this conversation based on insights that the author of this article actually shared in this really, really brilliant piece. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Erica. Erica Erica's journey has been an interesting and inspiring one for anybody that desires to be a mathematics journalist. How are you doing today, Erica? Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks.
We also appreciate it. Thanks for accepting our invitation. If you don't know Erica, Erica has been at the forefront of mathematics journalism for more than 20 years. Our exceptional work has been featured in renowned publications such as Quanta, Nature, The Atlantic, New Scientist, Science News, and many, many others. Erica is a recipient of the Joint Policy Board on Mathematics Communication Award and has been featured in multiple editions of the best writing on mathematics. So we are really, really glad that you can join us today. And before we start this conversation, I also want to thank our forum members and those that are joining us live on Facebook. If you are watching this live stream video on Facebook, we are really, really happy that you can be with us today. Thank you very much for your time. And also, just as they are doing here on Zoom platform, actively engage with us, interact with us using the chat box below the video that you are watching right now, and let us know where you are joining us from, and whatever question you have for Erica or for me, we are going to be as extensive as possible in addressing your queries. And hopefully at the end of the session, your mathematics reporting skills will be further widened, and you will not struggle to start a journey and be bold enough to take on mathematics. So with that out of the way, I want to start this conversation by asking Erica the question that I've also been asking a lot of people that we've had on this series, which is what personally attracted you to mathematics initially, and what is your mathematics relationship like? For instance, when during the first session, we did a survey regarding people's perception to mathematics, and it seems to be halfway. Some people say some respondents said they were okay with maths, while almost half said they dread mathematics. For you to not just pass math, but also be passionate about it, what was the personal journey like discovering and probably falling in love with mathematics?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that I have a somewhat unusual journey into mathematics because I actually come from a very mathematical family. My grandfather was a math professor and my parents were both math teachers. So there was just kind of math in the atmosphere as I was growing up. We would do logic puzzles together, and we didn't actually do that many mathematical activities together, but I think that, what was maybe a little unusual about me growing up is that in my family, mathematics was just not really considered something that you would dread or be intimidated by. Like, that idea just wasn't part of my upbringing at all. So I think that allowed me to be open to mathematics in a way that, some people have a very different experience as children. The people around them might be afraid of mathematics or just dislike it. And I think that you learn a lot from the attitudes of the adults around you when you're young. So I was very fortunate in not having that kind of attitude about mathematics presented to me early on. So I think that can really make it a lot easier to appreciate and enjoy mathematics. I mean, in my family, there was just this attitude that math was fun and interesting. So I didn't really have to learn to like math because it was just considered a given right from the beginning. Um, Now, having said that, I feel a lot of empathy for people who dread mathematics, or who didn't have that kind of early sort of open attitude about math presented to them, because I really feel like math, just like art and science and all sorts of other things. I feel like mathematics is part of our birthright as people. And one of the things that I try to do in my own writing is to get people excited about mathematics who maybe have not had that experience in classrooms, or in the attitudes of the people around them. Because I really feel like we all have the capacity to enjoy mathematics and appreciate its beauty.
You're absolutely correct. And I think, and I totally agree with you regarding the fact that it's really, really possible for all of us to actually engage and interact and connect based on this issue. And for me, I personally also believe that this this general a perception of mathematics as something that people dare really, really prevent a lot of people from actually understanding some stories, writing a lot of impressive stories. Let me give you an instance. A couple of days ago, probably about 2 weeks ago, I was in a training. They were talking about a tool that was used to predict the risk of communities or regions being exposed to having cases of coronavirus during the COVID pandemic. It was people were actually using that. Many health authorities actually use that tool, which is the HAR number, to actually warn their citizens to visualize the risk. But we didn't really know. Very few understood the science behind it, the concept behind it, how that was arrived at. And I believe that if some journalists were able to actually have that understanding of some of these mathematical concepts, they actually understood how to be able to query these principles, these procedures, these tools. Their eyes will be opening to seeing reporting stories from an entirely different perspective. So now I agree with you. You really had it really much different than others reporting mathematics. So when you read stories that probably the ones you didn't write, but in the general domain, what do you see regarding gaps that you believe mathematics, focusing a little bit more on mathematics can help us to fill? Generally, I don't want to restrict you. I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Mm. Well, so I tend to write about pure mathematics. And so I do think that there are a lot of um, topics that, things that are going on in the world that have a very mathematical core that is often not brought out. That's not so much the kind of writing I do myself, because I tend to write more about research advances in pure math. But I do think that there are a lot of mathematical concepts that are not um, taught so much in school, but that are not that difficult to grasp and that have a lot of applicability to things that we have to decide about in daily life. For example, just questions about, suppose that you get some kind of worrisome test result from your doctor, and understanding what does that actually say, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a terrible condition. It may just mean that you have a heightened risk for a condition, and there's fairly simple math underlying how you can calculate that risk, but that's not really taught, at least in the United States, which is where I'm familiar with the educational system. That those kinds of ideas are just not taught, and I feel as if there could be a big role for journalists in explaining to readers some of the mathematics that, if, you know, for reasons I don't necessarily agree with, are not taught in the classroom, but are quite accessible and have a lot of practical value.
Okay, okay. You absolutely. I think I understand the angle you're coming from. So let's talk about the mathematics landscape. Mathematics landscape at the moment. How does that landscape look like? Is it boring? Like some journalists that really asked me questions regarding this. Paul, you're asking us to pay a closer attention to this sector, but it appears extremely boring. Do you agree with that assumption, or how can you find the inspiration and the excitement that you can now pass on to your readers? So, what is your personal assessment of the mathematics landscape at the moment?
Well, I think that a lot of people sort of outside of mathematics and maybe outside of science journalism don't necessarily realize that mathematics is still filled with questions that we don't know the answers to, because the way that it's presented to us in school, it just seems as if we figured out all the mathematics a long time ago, and now you just have to learn it, and then you know it, and you're done. So I think that, probably most people understand that mathematics is useful in a lot of applications, and that maybe there are tasks to perform trying to, understand, well, how do I use this math to do this thing that I want? But I think that fewer people know that there's actually a lot of very basic questions in mathematics that we don't know the answers to. Um, so I feel like there is a lot of excitement that can be conveyed about the mathematics research enterprise. Um, just the fact that there are these questions that we've been able to formulate in our minds, but we have no idea what the answer is to them. And some of them are very arcane, but some of them are things that you could explain to just, a high school student, and we still don't know the answers to them. So, I think that there's a lot of excitement in that sort of general sense. And then more specifically, if you're writing an article about mathematics, I think that asking the mathematician, why is this exciting to you? They always have a reason. And I think that probing their thought processes and their excitement gives you a way to convey it to readers as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight. So briefly, I want to go to your article for the open book. And the first interesting aspect, one of the things that came out of, even from daily lines, was the fact that there seems to be this interest among editors for stories on this sector. Now, when you look at that, I think it speaks to what are the editors looking out for that we general journalists struggle to actually pinpoint the fact that this is interesting. So from your understanding, as much as you can tell me, why do you think editors, especially of some of the publications that are specialized or general outlets too, that still seem to be interested in, what do they find interesting that you think that knowledge could be useful for a journalist seeking to be pitching stories in this field?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I should preface this by saying that the editors that I spoke to are editors of science magazines. Neither of the ones that I quoted in the story are editors of newspapers, where there would be somewhat different considerations because it's a much broader audience. But I would say that for the the editors of, say, a magazine like Nature or Science or Scientific American, New Scientist, um, they do have a hunger, I think, for math stories because there just seem to be way fewer journalists who are writing about math research than biology or physics or astronomy. So, so I think that any math story you pitch to them, will hopefully get their attention because they're really looking for it. Um, I think that for a pitch to one of those magazines to be successful, there's various elements that you'd want to have in your story. So first of all, of course it has to have a news element, and there's so much interesting math out there that I don't get the opportunity to write about very much just because like it's not new. Um, and there are, there are bloggers and columnists who might write about older mathematics and they don't have quite that same constraint. But I think that for these magazines, it has to be something that's happened fairly recently, although it doesn't have to be like in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I think with mathematics, there's a bit more tolerance for things that maybe are from the past year, say. So you have a little bit more time to find a story and understand it. And so and beyond that, I would say that the things that they're looking for are, is this considered a significant advance by mathematicians? So, so you're going to have to do some reporting to see whether whether this story really is about a significant breakthrough. And are there some elements of it that feel somewhat accessible? Something that readers can latch onto, like this is familiar to me, or at least like I can follow what the context of this result is.
Thank you so much, Erica. I think you are really bringing a lot of insights into this conversation. Another thing that I found quite intriguing in your article was when one of the persons you interviewed said that math stories tend to be actually popular. So even though you've also, as I mentioned, that's a really, really important caveat that you only spoke to expert publications like science journals. So do we have an idea of what is driving that popularity compared to other issues that are covered by these publications? So what makes mathematics popular, even when a publication is also writing and publishing stories on other genres like physics, chemistry, other similarities? So what is peculiar that you think is attractive that brings audience to mathematics stories?
Well, I mean, to some extent, I'm speculating, but I feel like there's a lot of curiosity about mathematics out there. And I think it comes both from people who really enjoyed mathematics in school and from people who, maybe found it difficult or even traumatic. I think that mathematics it's different from the sciences. The sciences are really sort of trying to probe what's out there in the physical world, but mathematics is really about what we can come up with inside our brains. And I think that it's sort of it falls somewhere between science and art. And I think that people on some level kind of recognize that and want to understand it because for the same reasons that people might want to look at a piece of art. um, I think that people understand that it it's something fundamentally human. It's like a very human activity um, to come up with these constructs in our mind and explore them with our minds. And so I think people are just curious about that. And, and maybe people who had bad experiences with math in school are even more curious in a way, like wondering like what kind of people enjoy this and what kinds of things do they think about, because it is so far out of their own experience.
Okay.
So those are
Yeah.
my guesses.
Like I said, yeah, it's a good discussion. And I think you made some valid points. And another question, I really want to get to all the questions that we have for you before we start talking about the questions that the audience are already asking. And one quick thing for our audience, I really, really want you to not just type your questions, but actually ask your questions live. So if you want to talk live, just raise your hand. We'll activate your mic and we would like to hear from you. So one question that I have for you, which I think probably was too, you had some materials on it, and in your article, I think you mentioned, you answered a little bit in the article, but I really wanted to explain for the general audience, is mathematics reporting, whether we like it or not, especially when you want to do it at a core level for the kinds of platforms that you write for, is actually a technical undertaking. So what would you recommend as the what insights did you get from the editors regarding working with a first timer, somebody that is just testing it out? And what are your tips? What are the tips or insights that you gathered in putting the stories together that you believe somebody that is just starting out could find relevant?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there are two aspects to math journalism. I mean, apart from finding a story, which can be challenging in itself, but supposing that you found something that seems as if it could be a viable story, you need to report it, and then you need to figure out how to explain it to your readers. And both of those present some challenges. I think that mathematics reporting can be more challenging in some ways than reporting in other areas, because it can really take a certain amount of reporting before you feel as if you're starting to understand what's going on, because the ideas can be quite complex. So one piece of advice I have for journalists is, don't be too worried if your first couple of interviews, like, things don't seem to make a lot of sense to you. Keep thinking over what people are saying and what questions you want to ask the next person that you speak to, and don't expect to instantly understand. It often takes, it's this gradual process of, you do your first interview, and like maybe there's only one or two things that you kind of got, and a lot of it went over your head. And then maybe the same thing happens in the second interview, and then the third interview, maybe like you're like, oh, this thing, I remember the other person talking about that, but a little differently. And after maybe the fourth or fifth interview, things suddenly start to click. So don't worry too much if you don't get it right away, but don't stop reporting until you feel like you've gotten to that point where some things are clicking.
Continue, please.
I'm sorry, what?
Continue, please. I was agreeing with you.
Yeah. And then when it comes to writing the story, in some ways, that's a very similar task to writing about any complex story. But mathematics often requires a fair bit of exposition to enable your readers to understand. So I thought that Kevin Hartnett, who I interviewed for the story, had some really great advice for writers. He's been both a writer and an editor, and he recommended that when you finished your reporting and you're getting ready to write, you ask yourself, like, what are the maybe two core concepts in this story that I really want readers to understand when they walk away from reading my article, and then just every decision that you make as you're writing should be in the service of getting those two core ideas across. I think if you have more than two, I mean, it depends on how much space you have in your story, but unless you're writing a really, really long story, it's very hard to do justice to more than like a couple of
Mhm.
important ideas. So, you have to be careful not to try to do too much, because if you try to explain everything, you're probably going to end up with kind of a muddle. So I agree with him that it's important to do this process of really kind of mentally deciding like what are the most important things. And in addition to that, telling you what not to include, it also maybe gives you a structure for your piece that helps you to figure out how the ideas should flow.
Thanks, Erica. That was really, really helpful. Before we have Gezu on the line, but there are two comments in the article. There are two quotes in the article that I really enjoyed. I think also connected to what we are talking about here. And one of the quotes was by Sylvan Roberts, who is a Toronto-based journalist and a regular contributor to the New York Times. And the quote was that you have to be willing to shamelessly ask questions, but to some degree, you can crack it open and tell a story. So like Erica rightly said, you may not even get it at the whole picture right and simple enough in the first take. So you have to be able to still ask questions and over again. Then regarding opportunities, Quanta's editor-in-chief, Thomas Lin, says something that I'm willing to take a chance on someone really trying to carve a role for themselves in this field, even if they haven't written about the subject before, which actually means that the editors of these outlets are still willing, some of them are willing to give you your first chance, especially if you are coming from a region or report trying to pitch stories in some parts of the world that for publication for these publications that have a probably global reach, or they are actually the frontline publications. They rank high globally on that issue, especially if you are trying to cover report from a country that they've probably never published stories from. They would also be willing I believe they will also be willing to give you a chance. We'll take Gez's question right now. Normally,
May I? I just wanted to mention before we take the questions, I think that quote about taking a chance on a writer was actually from Eric Hand at
oh,
Science Magazine rather than Thomas Lynn, although I imagine that it's true of both of them. But yeah, I do think that there are a lot of editors who are eager to get pitches from journalists about mathematics and might take a chance on someone who hasn't written about it before.
yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Gezu, you have the floor to ask your question. Gezu, we are waiting for you. While Gezu figures out what to talk, there is also a question I have for you, which is bringing mathematics. What are your thoughts on bringing mathematics reporting to a platform or to a media outlet that wasn't doing mathematics reporting conventionally? For instance, let's say we have a journalist. Some of the journalists work with native general news outlets, and they are finding interesting locally relevant mathematics connected stories, but the media house probably doesn't have a dedicated mathematics editor. Generally, what do you think they can do, even though if they've come to terms that this is what we want to do, and they believe that they can still pull it off and go the extra mile of supporting the editor? So what are your tips in bringing mathematics reporting on board a media publication or media outlet that hasn't been doing anything like that before?
Mhm. Well, that's a little bit outside of my own experience,
Oh, I know.
but
Okay, you can
I
take
would say
it.
that because I tend to write for science magazines, so they've covered mathematics before. Um, but I would say that if you wanted to say bring a mathematics story to, say, a local newspaper that doesn't, and very few newspapers have a dedicated mathematics reporter or often even a dedicated science reporter. But I think that the considerations there wouldn't be so different from mathematics, for mathematics than for any other story that you might bring to the local paper, which is, you need to make a case for why is it important for local readers to hear this story? Is it going to broaden their appreciation for what's going on in their area? I think that there's exciting math going on all over the world. But I think that maybe a lot of people don't necessarily realize that there's, you know, exciting mathematics happening locally. So, I would, if I were going to try to pitch a story to, say, my local paper, I would try to bring out that element of like, let's try to let our readers know about what's going on around here that's exciting and important.
I'm really, really loving your uh, response to questions that even are not within your area of expertise, and that's why we are bringing experts in you from your side to share insight to the general audience. Talking of bringing insights from the mathematics reporting world to general audience, there is this interesting question from Shipra, which I'm paraphrasing thus. What insights from mathematics reporting do you think can be integrated into mainstream stories?
Mainstream stories about, well,
General reporting. Probably what are the peculiar strengths in mathematics reporting that you believe journalists that are covering general stories, the writing principles, the ethics, ethos that you believe are really, really some of the strongest points of mathematics reporting space that I believe other aspects of journalism can benefit from?
well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of mathematics underlying things that are happening on a day-to-day basis that, like a lot of the news stories that you might read in the paper do have a mathematical element if you kind of dig down into them. Like there are so many articles, there's so much to write about the climate these days, and there's a lot of mathematics underneath climate modeling. But I mentioned in my article various very topical issues that have mathematics at their core, um, things like virtual currencies or these AI chatbots. They're all, if you dig down into those, there's always a mathematics side to them. So I'm not sure whether I'm answering the question that you asked, but I do think there's a lot of mathematics to be found, that's underneath stories that we're all thinking about.
Thank you, thank you. Like I said, don't worry. I'm really, really this is really so much helpful for me. Let's talk about finding a mastery, and I'm really happy that you've been mentioning it. Like you rightly said, even when you are not reporting complex equations, a scientist solving a 30-year-old mathematical problem, we are surrounded by mathematics. We are surrounded by issues that we talk about every day that we can actually bring attention to. And I think for me, indirectly, that is a way to actually bring mathematics issues into general reporting. You mentioned cryptocurrency really, really well. You mentioned indices and insights regarding climate change. For those that attended last week's session, we also had our mathematics in terms of AI modeling being used in health issues. And for those that will be joining us next week, we have two researchers, two mathematics professors joining us from University of Oxford and Prodi University that will also be sharing insights on how mathematics is being applied routinely. So let's talk about that section of the article. And something that I really, really found intriguing was the fact that there is a different approach regarding mathematics story ideas compared to to other forms of stories. So what's different when you talk about story ideas in mathematics reporting? And I think we've been talking about it in pieces and frame by frame, but I want us to now bring it together now in story ideation for mathematics reporting.
So you're asking like what is different about a math story in terms of like reporting it and writing it?
Yes, then getting story ideas too.
Oh, getting the ideas. Yeah, yeah, and in some ways, getting the ideas for stories is maybe one of the aspects of writing about math that's the most different from writing about other areas of science. Because a lot of other areas of science have these sort of very established ways of disseminating their results to journalists. You know, like Nature has a weekly press release, and I think Science has a weekly press release, and universities put out press releases about big advances. And with mathematics, there's none of that. There are hardly any press releases about anything going on in mathematics. The field really just hasn't dedicated the same kind of energy to putting information out there that other sciences have. So I found, and Kevin Hartnett also said this about his writing for Quanta. I found that in general, the best way to find math stories is to talk to mathematicians and ask them, like, what is going on in your area of mathematics that's exciting at the moment? And sometimes that will produce some kind of concrete story idea that you can work with. Other times it might just be very interesting, but not necessarily conducive to a story right now. But maybe it's something you're going to return to in a year or two and say, hey, what's been happening recently? So yeah, so I feel like if for writers who want to develop a mathematics beat, it's a really good idea to gradually cultivate sources, mathematicians who sort of have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in their part of mathematics and can tell you about exciting things when they happen.
Thank you, Erica. And I want to also shed more light on what you said, coming from your words in that article. It's like you said, it's really, really beautiful. So let me read something out for our audience. Probably. It goes thus. When you were talking about let me see, I should be able to share my screen and just load that aspect out for people. So this aspect that I'm highlighting, so it reads thus: if your goal is to write about research advances, the best and the only way to find story ideas is to get mathematicians to share them with you. To some extent, that can be done indirectly by listening to what mathematicians say on Twitter and blogs. And Harnett would routinely cold email mathematicians to ask if they could chat. Gradually, he built out a spreadsheet of more than 400 sources, and every week or two, he would check in with a batch by email. Typically, he estimates 30% respond, and 2 of them have ideas, and 1 of those work. So this is actually a way for you to get your story ideas, which is one of the, so let me, if you would agree with me, let's start this way. And the first task that I encourage you to do is start with for identifying 5 mathematicians from your region, from your country, that are publishing on mathematics. And the simplest way one of the simplest ways you can do it is there's something that is called a Google Scholar. We promise to be hands-on, so let me see if I can share my screen and guide you on how to do that. This is something I want you to do. Go to scholar.google.com. And once you are there, you can just ask mathematics. My country is Nigeria. So if I'm looking for mathematics in Nigeria, so I search for that. And normally you will be seeing results that will be like this, but there are ways that you can update it to be more recent. And if you say since 2022, or let's say this year, if you want to be more recent regarding your study issues. And I'm not sure how Erica is feeling with the search results. Interesting, but you are going to be seeing what people are publishing around the subject of mathematics in your country. And so I think most of the publications from Nigeria are around attitude to mathematics, which I don't think is at the core of what we are trying to talk about. But that itself is in a story which you can actually adapt for a general audience. But let's just say hypothetically, I want to demonstrate for those that don't know how to use Google Scholar. I know this is a piece of cake to Erica and the rest and other experts on this. Let's say this article. Okay, wow, I'm not really feeling what I'm looking at. So I'm trying to, okay, very good. So there is a journal, Nigerian Journal of Mathematics. So if this article, so now the best way for you to know an author is you go to an article, you will see the name of the person that actually drafted the article. And by the time you come down, they would always have the contact details of that person. So for this article, this is the name of the author. So I'll just copy this name into my spreadsheet. And this is the email address of the author. So now I may be interested if this article, this research work is really impressive enough for me, I can just reach out to this author and say, yes, I read this article. Can we quickly have a quick call? So at least you start that relationship, you connect. And by the time you know it, you are talking about, okay, what is happening in your field? What are the current issues that you would have to address? So that's, in a nutshell, is from my perspective, how you can identify who are the publishers around mathematics, because in some countries, their own mathematics researchers are not active on social media. So you may not be able to see them on social media, but sometimes you can actually go to the journals, the places where they are publishing their works, and their email addresses and full names are actually there. So Erica, do you have additional tips on how to get experts by region on mathematics?
Well, I think if you're trying to find mathematicians in your area, which by the way, in the modern era with Zoom and everything, it's not necessarily like you don't have to limit yourself to mathematicians in your area. But if your goal is to talk to people locally, I personally probably would start by looking for institutions nearby, like universities that have a mathematics department. And I think that I would look at that, and I would look for mathematics conferences that are happening in your part of the world, and look at usually if you look up a conference, you can find a list of the participants and a list of the highlighted speakers. And that can also give you an idea of who there is in your general region who is doing important work and traveling to conferences and connecting with other researchers. So I think that's probably how I would approach things if I was trying to find trying to find mathematicians in a particular region.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So like she actually said, universities, departments, there are also conferences, and you can there are lots of ways. So you can't really exhaust but you can't say you don't know the mathematics. The tools are there, conferences are there. And talking of conferences, like we've done before, we've said before when we were talking about science reporting, journalists, scientists are always interested there are some conferences, there may be a conference that is happening near you. You can just, if you're not busy, you can attend. I love attending conferences, talking to researchers on the sideline and interacting with them. So what we are trying to say is that there are myriads of avenues, there are myriads of tools, those that you can do online, offline, and in person, for you to actually reach out to researchers and mathematicians. So just like any communication, I believe anybody that is interested in a researcher's work, that researcher will be excited enough to actually share insights with you. So thank you so much. Let's take some of the questions that we have already so that we don't Okay, Okot would like to know, mathematics reporting is quite niche. How do journalists reporting from Global South with few science outlets benefit? Do you want to take a crack at that?
I'll try, although again, this is outside of my direct experience. I would say that there are stories to be told about mathematics going on in the Global South, and there are not a lot of people telling those stories. It may not be that easy to find some media outlet that is willing to sort of invest in a continuing stream of those stories. And I don't know if I have any particular advice about trying to cultivate that, but I would hope that there would be opportunities at least to place the occasional story in a bunch of different outlets, because I do think that there is a case to be made, that people in the Global South want to understand the mathematics that, that their compatriots are doing. So I think it's worth a try, but I don't necessarily have an answer to the question of how to, if someone wants to create a career writing about mathematics, I think that probably to sustain that career, it would be necessary to cultivate relationships with editors at some of the magazines like Science and Nature and so on that consistently publish stories about mathematics if you wanted a constant stream of opportunities to write.
Thank you so much, Erica. Marcelino, you have the floor. Where are you joining us from and what's your question?
Yeah, good afternoon, goodbye, good afternoon, the world, this meeting. Good evening, first of all, we would like to several apologize for the things meeting later. I am welcome to know how we have the man to sunset and the everything that was covered and PDF.
You didn't get any of that?
Yeah.
I'm having a little trouble with the audio.
Yeah, same here, Marcelino. I think you're having background sound. Probably you should type and I'll read it out, if that's okay. Yes, so we go to another question
Although actually, but while he's typing that, can I actually return for a moment to the question that we were just talking about? Because okay. I was talking about how I think a lot of people, if they want to write about mathematics consistently, are going to have to, turn to some of the large publications that are not in the Global South. But I will mention there was one writer that I interviewed for my article named Dilip D'Souza, who is based in Mumbai. And he writes a weekly column for Mint, which is a financial newspaper in India. And so he has actually cultivated a consistent relationship where he writes consistently for one newspaper. So it can be done. You know, I don't know how easy it is to create opportunities like that, but there are some opportunities like that.
I think I really appreciate the fact that you are putting the reality of different scenarios into consideration, and the fact that there is no single brushstroke approach that happens everywhere. Absolutely, it's really possible. So I'm reading some of the questions. So we have Francis. Francis would like to know, how can mathematics be used to report on the current issues of subsidy removal on imported petroleum products in Nigeria, or when a government like that in Cameroon talks about spent billions to subsidize for products imported and they are sold in the country. Most people don't seem to understand the subsidy polemics. Can mathematics reporting be used to make for a better public understanding? So let me rephrase that, Erica. There is an aspect of journalism that is called explanatory journalism, in which you explain concepts, you break down concepts. So is that also a thriving kind of storytelling in mathematics reporting, and are there opportunities for journalists in it?
Well, I think it's a really important side of mathematics writing. And I think there's a big need for it. I do think that there are opportunities there as well. Perhaps not so much in the outlets that I've been mentioning so much all along, like Nature and Science and so forth, but in newspapers, for instance, that are really aiming for a broader audience. I think that there is actually a lot of important work that could be done. You know, I think that a lot of people struggle with some of the kind of basic numeracy that we need to understand the modern world, because, you know, as I think this questioner was sort of alluding to, there's so many aspects to daily, you know, the things in the news where you're talking about, oh, billions for this. And most people really kind of have a lot of trouble conceptualizing how big a billion is, really, because it's so far beyond the kind of numbers that we experience in the tangible world, you know, or in our daily lives. And so it can be very hard for people to properly contextualize that kind of information. But it's also really important for them to be able to, because we have to make big decisions about the world based on understanding those kinds of numbers. So I do think that there's a very important role for mathematics writers in trying to help readers to understand just the sort of basic mathematics that we need to understand in order to make policy decisions about the world.
Thanks so much, Erica. I'm really, it's really, you're really on point. And I also want to add something. When you have a specific, probably a tip that I will use when I'm reporting, when you have a specific issue of concern, like you just specifically described, I think it's really important. You can't just write it on your own. It's really, really important for you to reach out to experts in mathematics, mathematicians in your field, in your country, that you have connections with, that probably ask questions regarding their perspective and what mathematics say about that particular issue. You know, like we said, mathematics angle are quite numerous to different issues. So you can talk to them regarding how they feel and how it impacts the ecosystem, probably what mathematics angle you should look at, or look at publications in that field before, experts that are talking about it, what these experts are actually saying. So it's really, really not just about, I believe story ideas is about talking to people in this space and guiding you, because that is not just your story, except if you want to break it down and explain that concept to you. But it's only when you finish interacting with as many people as possible and with many experts as possible that you find something interesting, then that you can now say, okay, this is a story that I want to work on that is very, very relevant. We have two similar questions and that I want to combine for you, which is about format and forms. Like Anshira's question is there a specific form we should follow in the story or report, maybe order or something in the context? Thanks in advance. Then Tina is also asking something similar. Is there a particular format to do mathematics reporting? So let me capture it this way. What is your own approach to writing a mathematical story? Do you have like a checklist or the structuring that you put in place? I know the structure of one media house or one publication might be different from another, and the doctor and editor's perspective. So, but you as a writer, if you are working on a mathematics story, what structure, what checklists, how do you tackle it stage by stage? What are the stages involved in your process?
Well, I mean, so that's something I think that to some extent is very individual. Every writer has a somewhat different process. In my case, if I found what seems like a good story, usually my first step will be to get in touch with the authors of the paper and try to talk to them, because often if I'm coming into some mathematics story, I don't necessarily know who are the mathematicians who have specific expertise in that area, but I do know who the authors of the story are. So I often will start with them. Before I talk to them, I'll look at the paper and try to formulate some questions. Mathematics papers can be extremely technical, so it can be very hard to, like, you know, even some of them you can't even understand the first sentence. That there's a lot of variability in that. But I'll read as much of the paper as I feel as if I can, which usually is not more than maybe a page or two, but will hopefully spark some questions just to get the conversation going. Although when I'm reporting a story, I always write down some questions ahead of time, but I usually don't really look at my questions while I'm reporting. I just check at the end to see if there's anything I forgot to ask about, because I want to allow the conversations to go in all sorts of different directions. So and then I ask them, you know, who are the other mathematicians who might have interesting perspectives on this? And it's usually a fairly small collection of people because, you know, there's a lot of specialization in mathematics. So then I start reaching out to some of those people, and usually by the time I've had maybe 5 or 6 interviews, I feel as if I'm getting a feel for the story. So then I go through my notes, and every reporter does this differently, but what I like to do is read through the notes and make myself a sort of index of the important concepts and copy out my favorite quotes. And then that process just kind of distills the story in my mind. And then again, I don't actually use the index that much. It's more the process of creating it that is valuable to me. You know, but that's just my own process. And, you know, I think that every writer is going to have to figure out what works for them. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but, you know, you were asking about sort of my format, and I guess that's, you know, that's kind of my approach to writing stories.
Thank you so much. As we wrap up, do you have somebody who would like to know? I think you know them, you've already mentioned them in passing, but more specifically, Abubakar would like to know newsrooms that accept mathematics reporting pitches. So number one, you, Abubakar, you are going to do that extensive research on your own. And so do not think Erica will give you all the names, but I believe from the names that she has been dropping, you would have already gotten one or two, especially if you're interested in writing for a much more global and well-established audiences. So I'll put it this way. Which mathematics reporting outlets are you aware of, Erica, at the top of your mind? Do not be worried that you have to list everything. Which ones are you aware of at the top of your mind right now?
Well, I think that the magazine that does the most reporting about mathematics is Quanta, which I've written for a bunch, and I guess Jordana, who you spoke with last week, is on the staff there. They publish math stories on a really consistent basis. I would say like at least once a week, sometimes more than that. So they, they have this continual stream of math stories, and to keep that going, they need writers who can find those stories and bring them to them. So I think that Quanta is always looking for math stories. A science magazine, there was the quote from Eric Hand, he's eager for stories and he's willing to take a chance on a writer. I think that Scientific American, they also said they're eager for math stories. I know that New Scientist also runs lots of math stories, and I've written for them at various times over the years. I think they're glad to get math pitches. So those are a number of places. I can't speak so much to local outlets in the Global South, for instance, where I know that a lot of the attendees are based. But I think there are local opportunities, but then there's also opportunities at these big publications, because there just aren't that many people who are pitching math stories. So I think it's maybe easier to break into one of those big publications with a math story than with, say, a biology story or an astronomy story.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll come back to you with what you believe, the overview of your experience putting that story together, and going forward. Any last remarks that you have? But for now, I wanted to give you 1 or 2 minutes to think about it. So for our attendees, I have a little exercise for you that at the end of every session, we often ask you to fill a quick form, which is, what have you learned from this session and how do you intend to apply it? So this form is, I just put the form, the link in the box, but there are 2 additional questions today, which is to actually get you to figure out, start your journey towards mathematics reporting. And the first question is, we want you to look for 3 mathematics researchers, experts that are relevant to you in your local area, in your region, and try and figure out how you would contact them if you want to contact them. The goal is for you to actually be able, at the end of this session, to have 3 mathematicians that you can reach if you can. So it's something you can easily do. We've seen a lot of tips that you can do already. You can also be creative about your own. So fill that form right now, and yes, so that you have those contacts. And at the end of today, you can just send them an email to reach out, to start conversation. And it's just like them giving you the story ideas and you pruning it and polishing it and making it into something interesting. So tell us what you've learned from this session and how you intend to apply them. Then on your own, identify 3 mathematics researchers that are relevant in your area and how you plan to contact them. We believe this step would now prepare you for what is happening next week, which is the official commencement of the reporting, the story grants. And so the goal for next week is we are bringing 2 world-renowned mathematics professors for you to interact with. So if I were you, I would do those research and start having conversation, reaching out to those mathematics experts that you've identified, so that whatever you think they believe is an issue that is worth reporting or that is happening in the region, you can have a much global perspective of that story next week when we have these 2 mathematics professors as our guest. So please, okay, somebody said that they're asking for me to resend the form again. So I've sent the form. I hope you've gotten it right now. It's a Google form, and some people already, yes, some already are working on it. I've seen a number of responses already. Yes, so just do your best, and we hope we can support you to the fullest. And please start putting your story ideas together by today to next week. We believe if you've discussed with any of the 3 mathematics researchers that you've identified, you should be able to have an idea of probably a possible issue or story that you can work with. And we are available to support you through it all. And we are really glad that Jordana, who worked with Quanta magazine, was with us. She actually started this session, and so I believe she would be passionate and happy to have pitches from participants of these from this webinar series. So at least I can put in a good word with you, with Jordana. So yes, fill that form, and we are going to get in the process started. So thank you so much for that. I will now come back to Erica. Erica, do you have any last words, any in summary, insight from your story that I believe to be out there, or any general advice and counsel as we wrap up this session?
Well, I think one thing that we haven't touched on so far is just that, I think that a lot of journalists maybe are a little bit nervous about the idea of writing about mathematics. Maybe they think, well, I just don't have enough background. I wasn't great at math in school, or, whatever. There's a lot of people have a lot of self-doubt when it comes to mathematics. But I think that there's room in mathematics writing for writers who have a lot of mathematical expertise, and also writers who don't have a lot of expertise. Mathematics journalism is really a sort of active translation where you're taking this somewhat arcane subject and trying to convey it to readers. And journalists who have a math background are somewhat closer to the arcane subject, which can help them in terms of understanding it, but then they're further away from the reader that they're trying to communicate to. And I think that journalists who don't have as much of a math background, it may take them longer to really wrap their minds around these arcane subjects, but then they're closer to the reader that they're trying to communicate to. And I think that can be an advantage in some ways, in terms of really knowing what you need to say to them to get the ideas across, and which things are going to excite them. So, so I hope that journalists who don't have a math background will, give this a try, because I think that really all you need in order to write about math is a willingness to engage with a really complicated subject. But you don't necessarily have to have a lot of background in that subject, as long as you're willing to keep working at it until you reach a level of understanding where you can write something.
That was really, really beautiful. That was quite passionate. Oh, Paul, my camera is off. Uh-oh. Yes. Thank you for me having a backup. So yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Erica. We really appreciate it. Thank you for that passionate conclusion. Somebody also asked for that form again. Don't worry, I'm patient. I'm going to send it. Copying the form again. So that is the form to the questionnaire that we want to hear from you and help you in taking that step forward. I'm still looking at the camera that is off, so I should be looking at this one. So so next week, like I rightly said, next week is the finale of this 4-part mathematics reporting series, and let me introduce you to our guest next week. We will be having Professor Haya Griffiths, who is from the University of Oxford, and has published extensively on the application of mathematics. The way I see it, it's really, really a good opportunity for you to actually talk to mathematics researchers. If you have an idea that you're already processing, you can actually test out how to interact with them, how to ask them questions, how to get them to actually simplify their concept, their mathematics insights to you as a journalist. So you can now take it from there. Whatever you want to ask mathematics researchers, ask them. And you can see I'm still focusing on Hyan because Erica, it will be interesting to note that Hyan will be the first male expert that will be joining us on this series. We've been having amazing female mathematics journalists and experts since the beginning. And Hyan will be the only male that we're having on this series. So Hyan will not be the only one next week. We'll also be joined by Alexandra, who is from Purdue University in the US. So the way I want to see next week is me just taking a step back and giving you attendees the platform to interact with these two amazing mathematics researchers. Alexandra is also extensively gifted in simplifying mathematics concepts. So she actually published mathematics article in a science journal that is meant for children. So do not miss this opportunity to actually directly interact with her. And so which means if you're interested, I encourage you to be interested in that session. And please, registration. You can start registering already in the email that is coming to you later today. You would see a link to registration. But for now, let me put the link here. So I just put the link here so you can start registering for next week. I want to thank Erica so much. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Thank you for seeing this through. Thank you for participating. Thank you for your beautiful story. Thank you for amazing story. It's actually been very, very helpful, especially for someone like me that actually read it from the top to bottom. I really enjoyed it, and we'll continue to pass it on. And we hope as many journalists as possible read this story, and we hope that we begin stemming from this webinar series, we will begin to see even much more mathematics stories published, not just internationally, but some finding their ways into local media, bringing attention to mathematics issues, solutions, and so helping to solve crises, bringing attention to mathematics linked crises that can bring attention to interventions that would impact the lives of people in their local communities. So on behalf of the entire team of International Center for Journalists, we want to thank you so much. For those that are already part of our forum, you know that we are going to share that link to all the content that we've shared today on our Facebook forum. And but for those that are yet to join our Facebook forum, I just put the link right now in the chat box. We are going to share links to that particular story and other additional resources that we believe may be helpful for you in your mathematics reporting journey. So that is all for me this week. To learn more about this initiative and the International Center for Journalists, check out the International Center for Journalists website on www.icfj.org to access more resources, lots of resources regarding journalism. And we expect resources to be gotten from this webinar series to also be eventually published in a couple of days on IJNet's website. Please visit International Journalist Network website on www.ijnet.org. And I look forward to an amazing concluding session. I want to be impressed with your story ideas that you plan to write stemming from this engagement. And hopefully, I know that we will going to read amazing stories, and we hope that you've been able to learn one or two things from this session. So thank you so much for me, and thank you so much, Erica, and bye. And yeah, so that's it. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.